The scent of eucalyptus oil clung to my fingers as I kneaded the knots from Mrs. Chen's shoulders, my thumbs working in practice circles. Friday evening at Serenity Wellness meant the usual parade of tech workers and real estate agents, their stress manifesting in tight trapezius muscles and shallow breathing. I'd been doing this for 4 years now, long enough that my hands moved on autopilot, while my mind drifted to the grocery list I'd need to tackle after my shift. "Table 3 needs fresh linens," Sophie called from the reception desk, her voice barely audible over the ambient spa music. "Your 6 o'clock is here." My 6 o'clock. My pulse quickened slightly, a response I'd trained myself not to examine too closely. Every Friday at 6, like clockwork, for the past 4 years. Never late, never early. Always cash. Never spoke beyond the bare minimum. I finished with Mrs. Chen, accepting her generous tip with a bow of my head, and moved to prepare room 3. The familiar routine soothed me as I arranged fresh towels, adjusted the heating pad, and checked the oil warmer. Lavender tonight, I decided. He never requested anything specific, never complained, never gave feedback of any kind. In 4 years, I'd learned almost nothing about him, except that he carried tension in his lower back and left shoulder, that he had a small scar on his right hip, and that his silences felt different from other clients' silences. Heavier somehow. More intentional. The door opened and he entered without knocking, as always. June. I'd learned his name from the appointment book, though he'd never offered it himself. Tall, lean but muscular, with dark hair he kept short, and features that would have been handsome if not for the perpetual guardedness in his eyes. Tonight he wore what he always wore. Dark jeans, a simple black shirt, boots that looked expensive but understated. "Good evening," I said in Korean, the language we'd wordlessly agreed upon after that first session 4 years ago, when I'd greeted him in English and he'd responded in our mother tongue. "Same as usual?" He nodded once, already moving toward the massage table. I stepped out to give him privacy to undress and position himself face down, counting to 60 before knocking softly and re-entering. The sight that greeted me made my hands freeze mid-reach for the oil bottle. His back, which for 4 years had been smooth except for that small hip scar, was now marked with 3 angry wounds. Not fresh, but not fully healed either. Puckered tissue, still pink, the unmistakable signature of bullets that had torn through flesh and been extracted. One near his left shoulder blade, one lower on his right side, one dangerously close to his spine. My breath caught audibly. His muscles tensed beneath the sheet draped across his lower half. "Is there a problem?" His voice was low, controlled, but I heard the warning in it. My professional training warred with my shock. "Those injuries look recent. I should probably avoid that area. Or we could reschedule if..." "No." The single word cut through the air like a blade. "Proceed as normal." My hands trembled slightly as I warmed the oil between my palms. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. In 4 years of silent Fridays, he'd been a mystery. Yes, but a safe mystery. A man who paid well, showed up on time, and never made me uncomfortable. Now I was looking at evidence of violence, of a world I deliberately kept myself sheltered from, and every instinct screamed at me to walk away. But I didn't. I placed my hands on his shoulders, carefully avoiding the bullet wounds, and began to work. The tension in his muscles was different tonight, not the usual accumulation of stress and poor posture, but something acute, fresh. My fingers found knots that hadn't been there last week, mapped new patterns of pain. He'd been hurt, badly, and recently. The bullets were only part of it. "You should see a doctor," I heard myself say. "These need proper attention." They've had proper attention. His voice was muffled by the face cradle, but the edge remained. This is what I need now. I worked in silence for several minutes, hyper-aware of my hand's proximity to those wounds. They were about 3 weeks old, I estimated. Maybe a month. The timing aligned with the last session he'd missed, the only appointment he'd failed to keep in 4 years. I'd been oddly disappointed that Friday, though I'd told myself it meant nothing. My thumb pressed into a particularly tight spot near his scapula, and he inhaled sharply. I jerked my hand back. "Sorry, His hand shot out, faster than I could process, and closed around my wrist. Not painfully, but firmly, immovably. My heart hammered against my ribs as he shifted, turning his head to look at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Now you know too much," he said quietly. The spa music continued its gentle loop. The eucalyptus scent hung in the air. The heating pad hummed softly. Everything was exactly as it had been 60 seconds ago, and yet everything had changed utterly. "I don't know anything," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm a masseuse. I see bodies, not stories." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're smart, that's good, but not smart enough, or you would have asked for a different client the moment you saw those scars." He was still holding my wrist, his thumb resting against my pulse point where it hammered out my fear. I should have called for Sophie, should have pulled away, should have done any number of sensible things. Instead, I heard myself ask, "What do you want?" "The same thing I've wanted every Friday for 4 years, he replied. "1 hour where nobody asks questions, where everything is normal. Can you give me that?" Our eyes held for a long moment. I was aware of how alone we were in this room, how thin the walls were, how little Sophie at the front desk could do if this man decided to hurt me. I was also aware, strangely, that he could have hurt me already if that was his intention, could have hurt me any Friday over the past 4 years. "Yes," I said, "I can give you that." He released my wrist and settled back into position. I resumed the massage with shaking hands, but the shaking settled as I fell back into the familiar rhythm. Whatever danger I'd glimpsed felt less immediate now, tucked back behind the silence we'd maintained for so long. When the hour ended, he dressed quickly behind the partition and emerged with an envelope. Cash, as always, but this time far more than the usual amount. "For your discretion," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the second time in our 4-year acquaintance. "And your courage." "I'm not courageous," I replied, "just good at my job." That almost smile again. "Next Friday?" I should have said no. Should have told Sophie to remove him from my schedule. Should have listened to the part of my brain that recognized danger when it showed itself so clearly. Instead, I nodded. "Next Friday." He left without another word, and I stood in the empty treatment room with an envelope full of cash and the sudden understanding that my safe, predictable life had just developed a very dangerous crack. Sophie poked her head in as I was stripping the table. "Everything okay?" He seemed tense when he left. "Everything's fine," I lied. The first of what would become many lies. "Just the usual." But nothing was usual anymore, and we both knew it, even if only I understood why. That night, alone in my small apartment, I counted the money. 3 times my usual fee. Enough to cover rent and groceries with plenty left over. Enough to make walking away feel more costly than staying. I thought about the scars, about the controlled violence in the way he'd grabbed my wrist, about 4 years of careful distance suddenly collapsed into a moment of terrible clarity. I thought about how his skin had felt under my hands, familiar and strange all at once. And I thought about next Friday, already knowing I would be there, knowing something had shifted irrevocably between us, knowing that the safe mystery of our silent Fridays had transformed into something far more dangerous. I was right to be afraid. But I wasn't afraid enough. Not yet. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. I went through my usual rotation of clients, my hands performing the familiar movements while my mind circled endlessly around those 3 bullet wounds. Tuesday afternoon, Mrs. Park mentioned a shooting in Koreatown, her voice dropping to a scandalized whisper as she described the police tape she'd seen on her way to her hair appointment. I made non-committal sounds and worked a particularly stubborn knot from her neck. Wednesday morning, I caught myself researching gunshot wounds on my phone during my break, then immediately closed the browser and deleted the search history. What was I doing? What did I think I would find? More importantly, what did it matter? June was a client, an unusual client, certainly, but still just someone who paid for my professional services. The lie felt thin even as I told it to myself. "You've been distracted all week," Sophie observed Thursday evening as we closed up the clinic. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said automatically, wiping down the reception counter. "Just tired." She studied me with the knowing expression of someone who'd worked alongside me for 3 years. "This isn't about that Friday regular, is it? The quiet one who never talks?" My hands stilled on the counter. "Why would you think that?" "Because you've been weird since last Friday," she said bluntly. "And because he left you a huge tip that you keep touching in your purse like you're checking it's real." I hadn't realized I'd been doing that. "It's nothing. He was just generous." "Mina." Sophie's voice was gentle but firm. "I've seen generous tips." "That wasn't a tip. That was a payment for something, and I really hope it was just extra massage time." Heat flooded my cheeks. "Sophie, it's not... Nothing happened except the massage. But something changed." I couldn't deny that, so I said nothing. Sophie sighed, gathering her things. "Just be careful, okay? Men who pay that well for silence usually have something serious to hide." She had no idea how right she was. Friday arrived with rain that started as a drizzle in the morning and built to a downpour by evening. I'd dressed carefully, though I told myself it didn't matter. Professional black pants, a fitted top that was appropriate for work but more flattering than my usual choices, small gold earrings my grandmother had given me, subtle makeup, all perfectly reasonable choices that had absolutely nothing to do with June. The lie was getting easier. 5:30 came and went. 5:45. I prepared room 3 anyway, hands moving through the ritual as my eyes kept flicking to the clock. He'd never been late before, never missed an appointment except that one time a month ago when he'd presumably been getting shot. At 5:58, the door chimed. I didn't need to check to know it was him. I could feel it, some shift in the air that I'd only recently learned to identify. He was soaked, rain dripping from his dark hair and jacket. His face was more drawn than usual, shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. When he handed Sophie his jacket, I caught sight of his forearm, bruised in the distinctive pattern of someone gripping too hard. "Your regular's here," Sophie said, her voice carefully neutral as she hung up his dripping jacket. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and led him to room 3. The routine played out as always. My exit, the count to 60, the soft knock, the re-entry. But when I stepped inside, I found him sitting on the edge of the massage table rather than lying face down on it. "We need to talk first," he said. My stomach dropped. "Talk about what?" "About whether you reported what you saw last week." "I didn't." The answer came immediately, instinctively. "I wouldn't. That's not my place." "Why not?" He studied me with those dark, assessing eyes. Most people would have called the police, or at least asked questions. I thought about Sophie's warning, about the money in my purse, about 4 years of safe silence. "Because you asked me not to. Because you've been coming here for 4 years, and you've never made me uncomfortable. Not until last week, when I saw something you didn't want me to see. And now that you've seen it, I'm still just a masseuse. I said quietly. "You're still just a client. Nothing else needs to matter." He was silent for a long moment, studying me in a way that made me feel simultaneously visible and transparent. Finally, he nodded and moved to lie down on the table. "Except it does matter," he said, his voice muffled by the face cradle. "It matters because now you're part of it. And I need you to understand what that means." "Part of what?" I kept my voice steady as I warmed the oil. "A world where people get hurt, where asking the wrong questions is dangerous, where being in the wrong place at the wrong time can get you killed." My hands hesitated over his shoulders. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm protecting you." He shifted slightly, his next words coming slower. "By making sure you understand the rules. Don't ask questions. Don't talk to anyone about me. Don't try to find out who I am or what I do. As long as you follow those rules, you're safe." "Safe from what?" "From people like me." I placed my hands on his shoulders and began to work, my mind processing this new reality. 4 years of silent Fridays suddenly made sense in a terrible way. He hadn't been maintaining discretion. He'd been maintaining distance. Protection. Not for himself, but for me. "The wounds are healing well," I said after several minutes, my professional assessment cutting through the tension. "But you're compensating in your posture. Your right shoulder is carrying weight. Your left side should be supporting." "Can't be helped." "It can, actually. You just need to retrain the muscles. I can show you exercises." "Mina." My name on his lips stopped me mid-sentence. He'd never used it before. "I don't need exercises. I need this. 1 hour, once a week, where everything is normal." Something in his voice made my throat tight. I found myself working more carefully, more gently than usual, my hands cataloging not just the physical damage but the exhaustion that went bone deep. "Tell me if I'm hurting you," I whispered. "You won't." He was right. Despite the fresh wounds and compensating injuries, despite my awareness of the danger he represented, I knew exactly how to touch him. 4 years had taught me the landscape of his body better than I knew my own. Every tight spot, every area of chronic tension, every place that needed particular attention. The hour passed in relative silence, broken only by occasional adjustments and the sound of rain against the windows. When the session ended, he dressed behind the partition while I prepared the bill, though we both knew he wouldn't look at it. But when he emerged, he didn't immediately leave. Instead, he stood near the door, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're afraid of me now," he observed. "Yes." "Good. Fear keeps people alive. Is that what kept you alive?" I gestured toward where I knew the bullet wounds were, hidden under his shirt. "Fear?" "No." His voice was flat. "Loyalty did, and trust in the wrong people." The implication hung between us. He'd been betrayed, shot by someone he'd trusted, and now he was here, in my treatment room, trusting me to keep his secrets. "I won't tell anyone," I said again. "I promise." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell rain and something darker underneath, something that spoke of expensive cologne and carefully controlled violence. His hand came up, and I flinched before I could stop myself, but he only adjusted one of my gold earrings that had come loose. "These are pretty," he said quietly. "A gift? From my grandmother, before she died. You should be careful with them. Sentimental things are easy to lose." Was that advice or warning? I couldn't tell. He stepped back, and the moment passed. "Next Friday?" I managed. "Next Friday." After he left, I stood in the empty room for a long time, my hand unconsciously touching the earring he'd straightened. Sophie's voice from the front desk called something about closing up, but I barely heard it over the sound of my own racing heart. I'd thought last week's revelation had changed everything, but I'd been wrong. This week had changed everything. Because now I knew he knew I knew, and instead of ending our arrangement or threatening me, he'd given me rules to keep me safe. Which meant he cared, at least a little, about what happened to me. The thought should have frightened me more than the bullets. Instead, it kept me awake that night, staring at my ceiling and wondering what kind of person falls for a man who gets shot and comes to you for healing rather than vengeance. A foolish person, probably. Someone who didn't understand the rules of his world, who mistook consideration for affection, who confused silence for intimacy. But when Friday rolled around again, I would be there. I already knew that. Known it from the moment he'd touched my earring with surprising gentleness. I was in too deep to walk away now, even though every rational part of my brain screamed that I should. 3 months passed in a strange rhythm. Every Friday at 6, June appeared. Every Friday I worked on his back, watching as the bullet wounds transformed from angry pink scars to pale silver marks. Every Friday, we spoke a little more, though never about anything that mattered. Never about what he did, who he was, why he needed this weekly sanctuary. But the silences between us changed. They became charged, weighted with things neither of us would say. I learned the sound of his breathing when he was tense versus when he was relaxed. Learned that he carried tension in his jaw when something was bothering him, that his left hand would occasionally twitch when he was thinking too hard about something he couldn't control. He learned me too, I realized. Noticed when I'd had a difficult week, when my own shoulders were tight with stress. Started arriving 5 minutes early, not to disrupt my schedule, but so I could take a moment to collect myself before our session. "You look tired," he observed one Friday in late spring, his voice carrying actual concern. "Are they overworking you?" "No more than usual." I warmed the oil between my palms. "Just a lot of clients with the same problems. It gets repetitive." "Am I repetitive?" The question caught me off guard. "No, you're different." "Different how?" I shouldn't answer. Shouldn't reveal how much I'd been thinking about him between Fridays, how I'd started to look forward to 6 o'clock in a way that had nothing to do with the generous tips. But the words came anyway. "You're quiet. Most people feel the need to fill silence. You don't." "Silence is safer than words." He paused. "Usually." "Usually." "Sometimes words are necessary, like now." He shifted slightly, turning his head to look at me. "I need to tell you something. A warning." My hand stilled on his shoulders. "What kind of warning?" "There's trouble coming. Old conflicts resurfacing. It might not stay contained to my world. If you see anything unusual, anyone watching the clinic, following you home, you need to tell me immediately." Fear spiked through me. "Is someone targeting you?" "Always." The matter-of-fact way he said it made it worse somehow. "But this is different. More personal." "Your family?" I hadn't meant to ask. The question just slipped out, born from months of careful observation and quiet curiosity. I felt him tense under my hands. "What do you know about my family?" "Nothing," I said quickly. "I just assumed. That kind of betrayal usually comes from family." A long silence. Then, "My brother, Saiwan. He's ambitious, impatient, and he thinks I've gone soft." "Have you?" "Maybe." His voice was so quiet I almost missed it. "Coming here every week, trusting someone outside. My father would have called it weakness." "Your father is wrong." The words came out fiercer than I intended. Trust isn't weakness. Neither is needing moments of peace. He was quiet for so long I thought I'd overstepped. Then, "You should meet me somewhere else. Not here. Somewhere private." My heart hammered. "Why?" Because if Saiwon decides to make a move, anyone connected to me becomes a target. And this clinic, these appointments, they're too predictable, too easy to track. So we stop. You stop coming. I tried that. There was something raw in his voice. I can't. The admission hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. This wasn't just about the massage anymore, hadn't been for months. We'd both been pretending otherwise, maintaining the fiction of our professional arrangement, but the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. There's a building on Western Avenue, I heard myself say. 3rd floor, apartment 304. I could go there after my shift, if you need somewhere safe. What was I doing? Inviting him to a private meeting place, crossing every boundary I'd carefully maintained. But the alternative, never seeing him again, knowing he was out there somewhere, maybe hurt or worse, felt impossible to bear. That's your home. It wasn't a question. Yes, you're inviting me into your home. I'm inviting you somewhere away from the clinic, somewhere unpredictable. I resumed working on his shoulders, needing the familiar motion to steady myself. Where you can have your hour of normal without putting anyone else at risk. And what about you? Who protects you if you let a dangerous man into your home? You will. The certainty in my voice surprised us both. You've been protecting me all along. That's why you gave me the rules. Why you're warning me now. Another long silence. I could feel him thinking, weighing risks I couldn't fully understand. Finally, next Friday. 7 o'clock. I'll text you before I arrive. You don't have my number. Yes, I do. Of course he did. He'd probably known where I lived, my phone number, my entire background since our first session 4 years ago. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt oddly comforted. He'd known how to find me all along and had chosen to keep his distance, to protect me by maintaining boundaries. Until now. The session ended differently than usual. When he dressed and emerged, he didn't immediately leave. Instead, he stood close, closer than he'd ever been while we were both vertical and aware. This changes everything, he said quietly. You understand that? Yes. And you're sure? No. I wasn't sure of anything except that I couldn't bear to say goodbye to him. Couldn't bear to go back to my life before these Fridays had become the axis around which my week rotated. I'm sure. He studied my face for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small phone. Use this to contact me. Only this. Your regular phone isn't safe. Safe from who? From anyone who might want to use you against me. He placed the phone in my hand, his fingers brushing mine. Memorize the number. Don't save it anywhere else. If you need me, call. Anytime, day or night. June. Don't say my name. The sharpness in his voice made me flinch. Then softer. Not here. Not where anyone might hear. From now on, we need to be more careful. He left without another word, and I stood holding the phone like it was something precious and dangerous all at once. Which, I supposed, it was. Sophie was staring at me when I emerged from room 3. Mina, I don't know what's going on with you and that man, but nothing's going on. You're a terrible liar. She gathered her purse, her expression more worried than judgmental. Just promise me you know what you're doing. Promise me you're being safe. I promise, I said. Another lie to add to the growing collection. That night, alone in my apartment, I held the phone June had given me and thought about all the ways this could end badly. About the bullet scars on his back, about his brother's ambition, about trust and betrayal and the dangerous game I was playing. The phone buzzed. A single message from an unknown number. Next Friday, 7 p.m. I'll bring dinner. I stared at those words for a long time before typing back. Okay. One word. One simple acknowledgement that I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross, entering a world where asking questions was dangerous and silence was survival. But as I set the phone down and tried to sleep, I couldn't quite make myself regret it. For 4 years, June had been a mystery wrapped in silence. Now he was becoming something else, something more, something I was terrified to name, but couldn't bring myself to refuse. Friday couldn't come fast enough. The week passed in a blur of ordinary clients and extraordinary anticipation. I found myself cleaning my apartment with unusual care, changing the sheets twice, rearranging furniture in a way that felt more inviting. Then I'd catch myself and wonder what I was doing, preparing for this meeting like it was a date rather than a potential disaster. Wednesday night, the new phone buzzed. "Are you having second thoughts?" I stared at the message for 5 minutes before responding. "No. Are you?" "Every day. But I still want to see you." The honesty in those words made my chest tight. I set the phone down and tried to focus on normal things: laundry, meal prep, the stack of bills on my kitchen counter that reminded me I had a real life with real responsibilities. But Friday kept pulling at me, inevitable as gravity. Friday arrived with unseasonably warm weather. I worked through my regular appointments in a fog, going through the motions while my mind raced ahead to 7 o'clock. Sophie watched me with concern but said nothing, which was somehow worse than if she'd confronted me directly. At 6:30, I locked up and headed home. The bus ride felt endless, every stop a small eternity. I changed into casual clothes, jeans and a soft sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that suggested I was trying too hard, and waited. At 6:55, the phone buzzed. Parking. 2 minutes. I took a breath, checked my reflection one last time, and tried to calm my racing heart. This was June. The man I'd been touching professionally for 4 years. Nothing was different except the location. Everything was different. The knock came precisely at 7. I opened the door to find him standing there with a bag of takeout, looking oddly vulnerable in the hallway light. He'd changed too, I noticed. Black jeans and a dark Henley instead of his usual work clothes. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd just showered. "Hi," I managed. "Hi." He glanced past me into the apartment. "May I?" I stepped aside, and he entered my space for the first time. Watched as his eyes took in the small living room, the modest furniture, the shelf of books, the photos of my grandmother. This was my world, so different from whatever world he normally inhabited. "It's not much," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect." He set the takeout on my small dining table. Korean food. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got a variety. We ate with careful politeness, making small talk about nothing important. The food was from an expensive restaurant in Koreatown, far beyond what I could normally afford. He noticed me noticing. "Habit," he said with a slight shrug. "I forget that most people don't order from there." "What else do you forget about most people?" He paused, chopsticks halfway to his mouth. "That they feel safe in their homes, that they sleep without weapons nearby, that they trust the people they eat with." "Do you trust me?" "I shouldn't." He set down his chopsticks. "But I do. That's the problem." "Why is trust a problem?" "Because in my world, it gets people killed." There it was again, that oblique reference to what he did, who he was. I set down my own chopsticks. "Are you going to tell me? About your world?" "Do you want to know?" Did I? Knowledge was dangerous. He'd made that clear. But ignorance felt more dangerous now, like walking a tightrope blindfolded. "Yes." He stood, pacing to my window. Outside, the city sprawled in its Friday night chaos, oblivious to the conversation happening in this small apartment. "My father came to Los Angeles from Seoul 40 years ago," June said quietly. "He had nothing. Built everything from scratch. And the things he built weren't always legal. but they were effective, powerful. By the time I was old enough to understand, our family controlled most of Koreatown and parts of downtown. The Korean Mafia, I whispered. An oversimplification, but close enough. He turned to face me. My father died 5 years ago. I took over. Tried to make things more legitimate, less violent. My brother disagreed with that approach. Siwon. Yes, he thinks I'm weak, that I'm letting our family's power slip away. 3 months ago, he tried to prove it by arranging an ambush. The bullets you felt were meant to kill me. My hand went to my mouth. Your own brother. Family is complicated in my world. His voice was flat, emotionless. Power is inherited, but it's also taken. Siwon thinks it's his time to take. And you let him live? After he tried to kill you? He's my brother. For the first time, emotion cracked through his controlled facade. And maybe he's right. Maybe I am too soft. You're not soft. I stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. You're just not cruel. There's a difference. In my world, there isn't. We stood facing each other, close enough that I could see the faint scar on his temple I'd never noticed before, the shadow of exhaustion that never quite left his eyes. 4 years of professional distance had evaporated, leaving something raw and real in its place. Why me? I asked. Of all the people you could have told, why me? Because you already knew the worst of it. Because you didn't run. Because... He stopped, jaw tightening. Because every Friday for 4 years, you were the only hour I didn't have to be who I am. I could just be a body on a table, someone being cared for without agenda, without fear. The confession hung between us, achingly honest. I reached up without thinking, my hand cupping his face the way I might touch a client to check for tension. But this wasn't professional. This was personal in a way that terrified me. June. Don't. His hand covered mine, holding it against his face. Don't say anything that makes this worse. What if I want to make it worse? His eyes darkened. Mina, you don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for. The boldness surprised me, but it felt true. I've known for months, maybe longer. I could get you killed. Just by being here, by letting you into my life, I'm putting you in danger. Then teach me how to be safe in your world. There is no safe in my world. There is here. I gestured around my small apartment. For this hour, for as long as you're here, you're safe. Isn't that what you wanted? He stared at me for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression. A wall coming down, a decision being made. Then he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was the kiss of a man who'd been holding back for too long, who'd finally reached the breaking point. His hands cupped my face, angled my head, and I melted into him with a small sound of surrender. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. This is a mistake, he whispered. Probably. You should tell me to leave. I won't. Mina, stay. I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Stay tonight. Stay every Friday. Stay for as long as you can. And when it ends badly, when Siwon or someone else comes for me and you're caught in the crossfire, then at least I'll have had this, whatever this is. He pulled me close again, his arms wrapping around me like I was something precious he needed to protect. We stood like that for a long time, and I felt his heartbeat gradually slow, felt the tension drain from his shoulders. I've never had this, he said against my hair. Never let anyone this close. I know. How do you know? Because I've been touching you for 4 years. I know every scar, every tense muscle, every place you carry pain. You've let me heal your body. Why not everything else?" He laughed, a soft sound without much humor. "Because bodies are easier than hearts." Not true. Bodies break all the time. They just know how to put themselves back together. And hearts? Hearts are tougher than people think. They have to be, to keep beating through everything. We moved to my couch, settling into each other with surprising ease. He told me more about his life, about the business his father had built, about the impossible balance between legitimate ventures and the darker operations that funded them, about trying to move the organization toward legality, while old guard members resisted, while his brother schemed, while violence remained the easiest solution to every problem. I told him about my grandmother, who'd taught me massage techniques passed down through generations, about coming to America at 16, about working my way through school, about the small, ordinary life I'd built that felt enormous in its normalcy. "I envy you," he said at one point. "This simplicity, this peace." "It's lonely," I admitted. "I have Sophie, a few casual friends, but no one who really knows me. Now you have me. Do I?" He turned to face me fully, his hand finding mine. "I can't promise you safety, can't promise you a normal life or a future without complications, but I can promise you truth. And I can promise that as long as I'm alive, I'll protect you." "That's a terrible promise. What if I want to protect you too?" "How would you do that?" "By being your hour of normal. By reminding you that there's more to life than the violence you were born into. By giving you a reason to keep choosing something different than what your brother wants." He studied me in the dim light of my apartment, and I saw the moment he truly understood. This wasn't just attraction or a escape. This was a choice we were both making, fully aware of the consequences. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay." He stayed until midnight, and we didn't do more than talk and hold each other. But when he left, everything had changed. We'd crossed the invisible line from client and masseuse to something neither of us could name, but both recognized as dangerous and necessary. The phone buzzed an hour after he'd gone. "Thank you for tonight, for everything." I typed back, "Same time next Friday? Every Friday, for as long as you'll have me." I fell asleep holding the phone, a small smile on my face despite all the very good reasons I should be terrified. Next Friday came, and the Friday after that, and the Friday after that. What we were building in my small apartment was fragile and probably doomed, but it was ours. Our private world where he didn't have to be a mafia boss, and I didn't have to pretend I was just a masseuse. Where we could just be June and Mina, two people trying to find something gentle in a harsh world. It wouldn't last forever. We both knew that. But for now, for these stolen hours every Friday, it was enough. 6 months after that first private Friday, I woke to persistent nausea that had nothing to do with food poisoning. I stared at the positive pregnancy test in my bathroom with a mixture of terror and wonder, my hand already moving to my stomach in an instinctively protective gesture. June's baby. Our baby. A life created in the fragile sanctuary we'd built over 26 Fridays of careful truth-telling and cautious intimacy. I should have been more careful. We'd been careful, mostly, but there had been moments when careful gave way to desperate, when the weight of his world became too much and we needed the escape only each other could provide. The phone, his phone, the one I only used for him, sat on my nightstand. I picked it up 3 times to call him, then set it down again. How did you tell a man like June that you were carrying his child? How did you bring new life into a world where his own brother wanted him dead? Friday arrived before I'd figured out the right words. I went through my usual appointments in a fog, my stomach roiling with morning sickness and anxiety in equal measure. Sophie noticed, of course. "You look green," she observed at lunch. "Coming down with something." "Maybe." The lie came easily now. I'd gotten good at lying over the past 6 months. Just feeling off. She studied me with knowing eyes. Mina, when are you going to tell me what's really going on? It's been half a year of secretive phone calls, and that look you get every Friday afternoon. What look? Like you're about to do something terrifying and wonderful at the same time. An accurate description of what loving June felt like. But I couldn't tell Sophie that. Couldn't tell anyone. I'm fine, I said. Really. She didn't believe me, but she let it drop. At 7 that evening, June arrived at my door with dinner and exhaustion etched deep in his face. Things had been escalating with Siwon. I knew that from the terse texts I'd been getting, from the way June had started coming to my apartment with visible injuries again, from the increased number of security personnel I'd noticed, shadowing him when he thought I wasn't looking. Bad week? I asked as he set down the food. Bad month. He pulled me close, burying his face in my hair. But better now. We ate quietly, and I tried to work up the courage to tell him. The words stuck in my throat every time I opened my mouth. You're different tonight, he observed. Quiet, more than usual. I need to tell you something. My hand moved unconsciously to my stomach, and his eyes followed the gesture. I watched understanding dawn in his face. Mina, I'm pregnant. The words came out in a rush. About 8 weeks. I'm sorry, I know we were careful, but don't apologize. His voice was rough. He crossed to me, dropping to his knees in front of my chair, his hands covering mine on my stomach. Don't ever apologize for this. But your world, my world just got a hell of a lot more complicated. He looked up at me, and I saw fear mixed with something like wonder. And a hell of a lot more worth protecting. June, Siwon, can never know. Not until I've dealt with him. Not until you're safe. His hands tightened over mine. Mina, listen to me. This changes everything. I need to accelerate my plans. I need to... His phone buzzed. Not the one he'd given me, but his personal one. He checked it, and his expression went cold. What is it? A meeting. Tonight. Siwon called it. All the family leadership. He stood, pacing. It's finally happening. He's making his move. Fear spiked through me. Don't go. I have to. If I don't show, he'll know I'm afraid. It'll make things worse. What if it's a trap? It definitely is. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. But I've prepared for this. I have allies, people loyal to me, not to him. That didn't help last time. Last time I wasn't ready. Now I am. He kissed me deep and desperate. I'll come back to you. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. He pulled out his personal phone, typing quickly. I'm sending you an address. If you don't hear from me by midnight, go there. Ask for Marcus. He knows to protect you. June. Please, Mina. I need to know you're safe. Both of you. His hand rested briefly on my stomach. Give me that peace of mind. I nodded, throat too tight for words. He kissed me once more, then left, and I stood in my apartment trying not to feel like I'd just said goodbye to him for the last time. The hours crawled past. I tried to distract myself with television, with cleaning, with anything that would keep my mind from spiraling. The phone, both phones, sat silent on my coffee table, mocking me with their lack of news. At 11:30, a text finally came. But it wasn't from June. It was from an unknown number. Your boyfriend is bleeding out in a warehouse. Come alone if you want to see him before he dies. I'll send the address. My blood turned to ice. This was Siwon. Had to be. And it was obviously a trap. I should have called Marcus, should have gone to the address June had given me. But the thought of him dying alone, of never getting to tell him about our baby properly, of our child growing up without ever knowing their father. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The warehouse was in an industrial area near the port, dark and ominous against the night sky. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, every instinct screaming that this was a mistake. The door was unlocked. Inside, the space was cavernous and dark except for a circle of light in the center where June knelt, hands bound behind him, blood staining his shirt. A man I recognized from photos as Siwon stood behind him, gun pressed to June's head. "Mina, don't." June's voice was raw. "Get out of here." "She won't," Siwon said, smiling. "She's too stupid with love. Look at her, already carrying your brat. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could keep secrets from me? Let her go." June's voice was steady despite his position. "She's not part of this. She became part of this the moment she spread her legs for you." Siwon's crude words made me flinch. "But don't worry, brother. I'm not going to kill her. She's more useful alive. A reminder of what happens when you go soft. Touch her and You'll what? You're the one on your knees." Siwon laughed. "This is how it ends, brother. You lose everything. Your organization, your life, your woman and child, and I take what was always meant to be mine." "No." The word came from behind us. I turned to see Marcus, June's second in command, the man I was supposed to have called, standing in the doorway with a dozen armed men. "This is how it ends. You in cuffs or in a body bag. Choose." What followed happened too fast for me to fully process. Siwon's men appeared from the shadows. There were shouts and gunfire, and I found myself tackled to the ground by Marcus, his body shielding mine as chaos erupted around us. When the shooting stopped, Marcus helped me up. Siwon was on the ground, wounded but alive, being restrained by June's men. And June was standing, freed from his bindings, blood still staining his shirt, but otherwise seemingly unharmed. His eyes found mine across the warehouse, and the relief in them was so intense it brought tears to my eyes. "Get her out of here," June ordered Marcus. "Take her somewhere safe." "No," I pulled away from Marcus. "I'm not leaving without you." "Mina, I'm not leaving." I crossed to him, ignoring the carnage around us, ignoring Siwon's groans of pain. "You promised you'd come back to me, so come back." He pulled me close, and I felt him shaking. "You should have stayed away." "I know. I'm terrible at following rules." Despite everything, he laughed. The aftermath took weeks to resolve. Siwon survived his wounds, but June used the assassination attempt to consolidate power and force his brother into exile, Korea, with enough money to live comfortably, but far from any position of influence. The organization underwent massive restructuring, with June systematically removing anyone loyal to his brother and promoting those who shared his vision of moving toward legitimate business. I spent those weeks in a safe house in the hills, protected by Marcus and a rotating crew of guards, while June cleaned up the mess. He visited when he could, which wasn't often enough, his face growing more drawn with each passing day. "I'm ending it," he told me one night, his hand resting on my growing belly. I was 3 months along now, just starting to show. All of it. The illegal operations, the violence, everything my father built on blood. "Can you do that?" "I have to. For this." He pressed his palm more firmly against me, and I felt the baby flutter in response. "I can't be that person anymore. Won't be that person for our child." "What will you do?" "The legitimate businesses are profitable enough. Real estate, import-export, restaurants. We don't need the rest. It'll take time to divest properly, to pay off the right people to ensure smooth transitions. But it's possible. It's necessary. And the people who won't like that change, they can follow Siwon to Korea. Or they can accept that the world is changing." His jaw tightened. "I'm not my father. I'm not Siwon. I'm going to be someone different. Someone our child can be proud of." By the time I was 8 months pregnant, June had sold off most of the illegal operations and consolidated the remaining business into a legitimate holding company. We'd moved to Busan, South Korea, far from Los Angeles, far from the life he'd known, to a city where we could start fresh. The apartment overlooked the ocean, and sometimes I'd stand at the window with my hands on my swollen belly, marveling at how far we'd come from that rainy night when I'd first felt his bullet scars. "What are you thinking?" June asked, coming up behind me and wrapping his arms around me. "That this doesn't feel real. 6 months ago, I was hiding in a safe house, terrified. Now we're here. Having second thoughts?" "Never." I leaned back against him. "Are you?" "Every day." His hands found mine on my stomach. But then I remember why we're doing this. Why I walked away from everything I knew. Our son was born on a warm June morning, screaming his entrance into the world with impressive volume. June held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "He's perfect. And he's ours. And he'll never know the world I came from. He'll know you fought to give him something better. That's enough." 3 years passed. We built a quiet life in Busan, June running his legitimate businesses, me working part-time at a local spa, our son growing up bilingual and blissfully unaware that his father had once been someone people feared. One evening, as I was giving June his weekly massage, some habits were too ingrained to break. Our son climbed onto the table beside him. "Daddy has always," he observed, touching the bullet scars that had faded, but never disappeared. "Old always," June said, "from before you were born. Do they hurt?" "Not anymore." June's eyes found mine. "Your mommy fixed them." It was both truth and metaphor. I had fixed what I could, and the rest we'd learned to live with. The scars remained, a reminder of the life he'd left behind, but they no longer defined him. That night, after our son was asleep, I found June on our balcony, staring out at the ocean. "Regrets?" I asked, sliding my arms around him. "None." He turned to face me, his hands cupping my face. "I gave up power, gave up my father's legacy, gave up everything I was raised to be, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because this, you, our son, this life, is worth more than any empire." "What if Sawan comes back?" "He won't. He's building his own thing in Seoul, different, but his own." June smiled slightly. "Last I heard, he's engaged, going legitimate too, in his own way." Turns out exile gave him perspective. "So it's really over?" "It's really over." He kissed me, slow and deep. "No more bullets, no more blood. Just this, just us." I kissed him back, tasting salt air and promises kept. The journey from that first forbidden touch to this peaceful life had been dangerous and difficult, but we'd survived it together. That night, as I ran my hands over the scars on his back one more time, I thought about healing, about how some wounds close, but never fully disappear, about how the marks we carry tell the story of who we were and who we chose to become. June's scars would always be there, a permanent reminder of bullets and betrayal. But they were also proof of survival, of transformation, of a man who'd chosen love over violence. And I was the only one who had permission to touch them, to trace the paths of old pain and new beginnings. It was a privilege I never took for granted. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you," he replied. "Always have. Since that first Friday when you touched me like I was human instead of dangerous. You were always human. I just helped you remember it." He laughed softly, pulling me closer. And as we stood together on that balcony overlooking the ocean, with our son sleeping peacefully inside and the past finally behind us, I knew we'd found what we'd been searching for all along. Not safety, that was an illusion. Not normalcy. We'd never have that. But peace. The kind of hard-won peace that comes from facing darkness together and choosing light. The kind of peace worth fighting for. Worth building a life on. Worth keeping.